There is a moment in some families when a truth does not arrive with an argument, a slammed door, or a dramatic confession. It arrives quietly. It slips into your awareness through one small detail that suddenly makes old memories look different. Tonight, imagine that moment coming closer. You have carried questions about your sister that you could never fully explain, and perhaps you have wondered why certain conversations always seemed to stop when you entered the room. But what if the story you have been telling yourself was missing one important piece? What if the distance between you was never as simple as you believed? Picture yourself sitting alone in the soft light of evening, the room unusually still. Your phone rests beside you, untouched. Outside, the world continues as normal, but inside your thoughts, something refuses to settle. You remember your sister's face from years ago, the way she could laugh with you one minute and become strangely quiet the next. You remember moments when you thought she was angry with you, moments when you felt rejected without understanding why. Yet another question begins to rise beneath those memories. What was she trying so hard not to say? You may remember one particular evening when the two of you stood in a kitchen filled with the faint smell of coffee and rain coming through an open window. She had something to tell you. You could see it in her eyes. She started with, "There's something you don't understand about me." Then the phone rang, interrupting her before she could finish. At the time, you brushed it aside. Life moved forward. Other responsibilities appeared. Years passed. But now, in the fictional story unfolding here, that unfinished sentence returns with a strange weight. Why had she chosen that moment to speak? The answer does not appear immediately. Instead, another memory surfaces. You remember a family gathering where everyone seemed comfortable except your sister. She stayed near the edge of the room, helping in the kitchen while conversations filled the house. When you approached her, she smiled too quickly. You asked if she was okay. She said, "I'm fine," but her hands were trembling slightly as she folded a dish towel. You almost asked again, but something in her expression stopped you. Was she hiding something from you, or was she protecting you from something she thought you were not ready to hear? Years later, you might have interpreted that moment differently. Maybe you thought she was jealous. Maybe you thought she was competing with you. Maybe you believed she had simply changed. And once a family begins believing a story about someone, that story can become almost impossible to challenge. Every silence becomes evidence. Every missed call feels intentional. Every disagreement seems to confirm what you already suspect. But what happens when the first assumption turns out to be wrong? That is where the story takes its first unexpected turn. One afternoon, your sister finds an old box while cleaning a room that had remained untouched for years. Inside are photographs, handwritten notes, receipts, and a small envelope with your name on it. The envelope is worn around the edges, as though it had been opened and closed more than once. She holds it for a long time before sitting down. She recognizes your handwriting on the front, but she does not remember writing what is inside. And suddenly, she understands why she has been afraid to give it to you. Not because the envelope contains something cruel. Because it contains something that could change the way you remember her. She places it on the table and stares at your name. Her first instinct is to tear it apart. Her second is to call you. Instead, She waits. She remembers a promise she made long ago, one you never knew existed. And that promise forces her to confront something she has avoided for years. Meanwhile, you are living your ordinary day completely unaware. You are making plans, answering messages, thinking about things that have nothing to do with your sister. Yet somewhere across the distance between you, a decision is being made that may eventually bring an old truth back into your life. Then your phone rings. Her name appears on the screen. You stare at it longer than usual. You almost let it go to voicemail. Something inside you says, "Answer." When you do, there is silence on the other end. Not an angry silence. Not an awkward silence. A trembling silence. Finally, she says your name. You ask, "What happened?" She takes a breath and answers, "I need you to hear me before you decide what to think." Those words change the entire atmosphere of the conversation. You sit down. She begins carefully, as though every sentence has to pass through years of fear before reaching you. She tells you there were things happening around your family that you did not understand when you were younger. She tells you that some decisions that looked personal were actually made under pressure. She tells you there were moments when she wanted to stand beside you but believed doing so would make things worse. Then she stops. You ask the question that has been waiting inside you for years. Why didn't you tell me? Her voice becomes softer. Because I thought you would hate me. The room seems to become completely still. You had expected an explanation. You had expected an excuse. You had not expected fear. For the first time, you begin to wonder whether the person you thought was pushing you away might have been struggling to protect something she could not explain. But she still has not told you everything. There is another layer. And this is where the emotional truth becomes more complicated. Your sister tells you about a period in her life when she felt completely lost. She remembers sitting alone in her car after a family gathering, unable to go home. She had received a message that changed her plans, and she believed responding honestly would hurt someone she loved. So she chose silence instead. You ask who the message was from. She does not answer. You ask again. Still nothing. Then she says, "You already know this person." Your heart sinks. Suddenly, old conversations begin rearranging themselves in your mind. A name you had forgotten. A disagreement you never understood. A strange change in your sister's behavior. A family event where she disappeared for nearly an hour. A conversation that ended the moment you entered the room. None of these details prove anything. But together, they form a question you cannot ignore. Who was she trying to protect? Your sister finally tells you that the truth was never about choosing between you and someone else. It was about a decision she made when she believed there was no safe way forward. She thought she could carry the burden alone. She thought time would make it disappear. Instead, time buried it deeper. Then comes the revelation that changes the emotional direction of everything. She tells you that one of the memories you have carried for years is not what you think it is. You remember the day clearly. You remember believing your sister deliberately abandoned you during one of the hardest moments of your younger life. You remember waiting for her. You remember looking toward the door and feeling the painful certainty that she had chosen not to come. But she says that is not what happened. She was there. She was closer than you ever knew. She had arrived before you did. And she left only after someone told her that staying would make the situation worse. You whisper, "Who told you that?" This time, she answers. But before she can finish, the call suddenly disconnects. You call back. No answer. Again. Nothing. Then, several minutes later, a message appears. Only 7 words. I never wanted you to know this. You stare at the screen. And beneath those words is a photograph. It is old, slightly blurred, and taken in a place you recognize immediately. A place you have not thought about in years. You zoom in. At first, you see nothing unusual. Then you notice someone standing in the background. Someone who should not have been there. Someone connected to the memory your sister just described. And suddenly, the question is no longer whether your sister was telling the truth. The question is why she had been carrying this secret alone for so long. You look at the photograph again. There is a handwritten date on the back. The date is the same day you believed your sister walked away from you. Your breathing slows. Your thoughts race. Because now you realize something even more unsettling. If the photograph is genuine, then the version of that day you have remembered all these years was incomplete. And if that memory was incomplete, what else about your family story have you misunderstood? Your sister calls again. This time, you answer immediately. She says only one sentence. There's one more thing I need to show you. Then you hear her voice break. It's the reason I stayed silent all these years. The line goes quiet. And just before the call ends, she whispers a name you never expected to hear again. A name connected to the one family secret you thought had been buried forever. You sit there in silence, realizing that the truth you wanted may be nothing like the truth you were prepared to receive. And somewhere inside that realization is the beginning of forgiveness, the possibility of healing, and a question that can no longer be avoided. What really happened that day, and why did your sister believe you could never be allowed to know? The answer is waiting in the next piece of that old story. The seal gives way. For a second, you cannot move. The envelope feels impossibly light in your hands, yet the weight of what it represents seems to fill the entire room. You slowly pull out the folded paper and unfold it beneath the lamp. There are only 3 lines. The first says, I should have told you sooner. The second says, you were never the reason I left. And the third says nothing at all. Instead, there is a date. You stare at it until the numbers begin to blur. It is the date of the night you have spent years trying not to remember. Suddenly, the old memory returns in fragments rather than a complete scene. A hallway. A half-open door. Your father's coat hanging beside it. The faint sound of 2 adults speaking in another room. You were younger then, too young to understand why the voices had become unusually quiet whenever you entered. You remember asking a question. You remember nobody answering. And most of all, you remember looking into your father's eyes and seeing something you interpreted as disappointment. But now, with the paper trembling between your fingers, another possibility begins to emerge. What if it wasn't disappointment? What if it was fear? You sit back slowly. For years, you built an entire explanation around one expression on his face. You decided he was unhappy with you. You decided your choices had hurt him. You decided that if you had been different, more obedient, more successful, more attentive, perhaps the years afterward would have unfolded differently. But memory is strange. When we are young, we don't understand silence. We fill it with ourselves. And sometimes we grow into adults carrying conclusions that were never true. You look again at the date. Then you notice something written faintly beneath it. I was trying to protect you from a truth you weren't ready to carry. Your heart sinks. Not because the words frighten you, but because they reopen a question you thought had been settled long ago. What was he protecting you from? The answer does not arrive immediately. Instead, another memory surfaces. You are standing in a kitchen late at night. Your father is washing a glass at the sink. You are older now. Old enough to notice the tiredness around his eyes. Old enough to know that something is wrong, but still young enough to believe adults always know what to do. You ask him whether everything is okay. He turns toward you. For a moment, he looks as though he is about to say something enormous. Then he smiles. Everything will make sense someday. You hated that sentence. Because someday never seemed to come. Until now. The paper falls slightly in your lap. And then you see the name on the envelope again. It belongs to someone from your family's past. Someone you haven't spoken about in years. Someone you were told had simply disappeared from your life for reasons you never fully understood. Your mind searches through old conversations. Old photographs. Old arguments. Old explanations that never quite fit. Then you remember something your father once said when you asked about that person. Sometimes loving someone means allowing them to believe the wrong story until they are strong enough to survive the right one. At the time, you thought he was talking about someone else. Now you wonder if he was talking about you. The realization changes the atmosphere around you. This is no longer about finding a sentimental message from a beloved parent. It is about discovering that an important piece of your childhood may have been deliberately left incomplete. And suddenly, the emotional distance you once felt from your father looks different. Maybe he wasn't withholding love. Maybe he was carrying information he believed would crush you. Maybe the silence that wounded you was also the shield he thought you needed. But there is still one problem. If he was protecting you, why did he leave you believing you were responsible? You turn the page over. There is writing on the back. I watched you blame yourself. Your eyes fill instantly. The words seem to reach somewhere deeper than memory. Because that is exactly what happened. You blamed yourself for the arguments. For the distance. For the things you couldn't fix. For the last conversation. For the words you wish you could take back. For the words you never got to say. And perhaps the most painful part was believing that your father went away carrying a disappointment in you. But the next sentence destroys that belief. I never carried anger toward you. You close your eyes. A long breath leaves your body. For the first time, you allow yourself to imagine a different version of the past. One where your father remembered your laughter more than your mistakes. One where he treasured the ordinary mornings. One where your difficult conversations didn't erase the thousands of quiet moments when he loved you without needing to announce it. One where his final thoughts about you were not defined by the last chapter. And then another sentence appears beneath the others. You need to stop trying to apologize for a life I already forgave. The room becomes completely still. That line hurts because you realize how long you have been waiting for permission to stop punishing yourself. You have carried an invisible courtroom inside your mind. Every mistake became evidence. Every disappointment became a verdict. Every relationship that failed became proof that something was wrong with you. Every dream that collapsed became another reason to believe you had somehow let him down. But what if your father's imagined message is asking you to put down the case? What if forgiveness was never something you had to earn from him? What if the person you have been waiting to forgive is yourself? You wipe your eyes. Then you notice a small photograph beneath the paper. You lift it. It is an old picture of your father standing beside someone you recognize immediately. The person from the envelope. But there is something strange about the photograph. Your father is holding a small box. You have seen that box before. Your stomach tightens. It was in your house when you were young. You remember asking what was inside. Your father told you it contained something important. Then, one day, it vanished. You search your memory. Where did it go? You turn the photograph around. On the back, your father's handwriting reads, "The box belongs to you." Your pulse quickens. There is no box in the room. Only the photograph. Only the letter. Only the unanswered question. And then you hear something outside. A soft sound against the window. You look up. Nothing. You almost laugh at yourself for being startled. But when you turn back toward the table, another piece of paper is there. You know it wasn't there before. Your hands become still. You reach for it carefully. There is only one sentence. Look where you kept the things you couldn't throw away. You know the place immediately. The old storage cabinet. The one you haven't opened in years. You walk toward it. Every step feels like moving backward through time. The cabinet door sticks before finally opening with a low wooden groan. Inside are things you forgot existed. A school notebook. An old jacket. A broken watch. A stack of photographs. A birthday card. And at the very bottom, underneath everything else, you see it. The box. Your father's box. Your hands begin to shake. You pull it free. There is dust along the edges, but the small metal clasp is still intact. For years, you thought the box had disappeared. It hadn't. You had simply buried it beneath the things you were afraid to remember. You carry it back to the table. The photograph lies beside it. You place the box down. For several seconds, you simply stare. Then you open the clasp. Inside is not money. Not jewelry. Not anything valuable in the way you expected. There are letters. Several of them. And beneath the letters is a small recording device. Your heart pounds. You pick it up. There is one button. One file. One date. The date is the night you have been remembering. Your finger hovers above the button. You almost press it. Then you notice the letters. Each envelope has your name. But the first one is addressed differently. Open this when you finally understand that your father wasn't trying to leave you behind. You unfold it. The first sentence makes your entire body go cold. I need you to know what happened after you walked away that night. You stop. Because you remember walking away. You remember being angry. You remember thinking your father had chosen someone else over you. You remember refusing to turn around when he called your name. But you never knew what happened afterward. Until now. The letter continues. He followed you to the door. Your eyes blur. You read the next line. He stood there for several minutes. Then another. He wanted to tell you everything. You swallow hard. And then comes the sentence that changes the meaning of the entire memory. But someone arrived before he could. You freeze. Someone arrived. Who? Why? And what did that person say? Your eyes move to the recording device. Suddenly, the box no longer feels like an old family possession. It feels like a doorway. A doorway into the one conversation you thought you had lost forever. You press the button. For several seconds, there is only static. Then you hear breathing. A chair moving. A faint sound in the background. And finally, your father's voice. Older than you remember. Tired. Unsteady. But unmistakably his. He says your name. Not angrily. Not sadly. Tenderly. Then there is a pause. And his next words are so unexpected that you stop the recording without realizing it. Because he isn't talking about what happened that night. He is talking about something that happened years before you were born. Something involving the person whose name is written on the envelope. Something he promised never to reveal unless there came a day when you were finally ready. You stare at the recording device. Your hand is shaking. The room seems suddenly too small for the truth waiting inside it. You press play again. The static returns. Your father's breathing fills the silence. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, he says, "If you're hearing this, it means the secret has already found its way back to you." You stop breathing. And before the recording can continue, the device clicks off. The screen goes dark. You press the button again. Nothing. Again. Nothing. Then you notice a tiny red light blinking beside the battery compartment. There is another file. Hidden. You touch it. The screen displays a single word. Tomorrow. And beneath it, a time. A time you recognize immediately. Because it is the exact hour when, years ago, your father made the decision that changed everything you thought you knew about your family. You look toward the window. The night has begun to fade. Morning is coming. And for the first time, you realize the message wasn't asking you to look backward. It was preparing you to confront what is still waiting ahead. Because somewhere, somehow, the person connected to that old secret may still know the truth. And tomorrow, you may finally meet them. But there is one detail your father never mentioned in the letter. One detail hidden inside the box. A second photograph. You turn it over. And there, written beneath the image, is a sentence that makes your heart stop. They know who you are. You stare at the photograph. Then you recognize the face standing beside your father. It isn't a stranger. It isn't someone from your distant past. It is someone who is still part of your life. And suddenly, tomorrow doesn't feel like another day. It feels like the moment the last hidden piece of your story is finally ready to come home. The photograph remains between your fingers. You look at the face again, searching for something your mind refuses to accept. Then it comes. Not as a dramatic revelation, but as a tiny detail. The watch. The person in the photograph is wearing the same watch you saw years ago on the night everything changed. Suddenly, the memory becomes clearer. You remember the hallway. You remember your father's voice. You remember another voice answering him. And you remember the person standing in the doorway. It was someone you trusted. Someone who remained close to your family afterward. Someone you never suspected because your younger self had no reason to question them. You sit down slowly. The truth you feared is not that your father betrayed you. It is almost the opposite. He had been trying to protect you from a decision made by someone else. That night, your father had discovered that this person was planning to take something from the family, something connected to the small box, something that could have changed your future before you were old enough to understand what was happening. Your father confronted them. They argued. You heard only fragments. Then you walked away. You thought your father had been angry with you. But he wasn't. He was angry because someone had placed you in the middle of a situation you should never have had to carry. The missing pieces begin falling into place. The distance that followed. The sudden changes. The explanations that never made sense. The way your father became unusually protective. The strange silence whenever that person's name came up. And then you remember the last thing your father said to you that night. You had misunderstood it for years. He wasn't saying, "Don't come back." He was saying, "Give me time to make this right." Your eyes close. A tear moves slowly down your cheek. All those years, you had believed the final moment between you was a rejection. It wasn't. It was a promise. A promise he never had the chance to finish. You pick up the recording device again. This time, the hidden file plays. Your father's voice returns. If you're hearing this, you've probably spent years believing that night was your fault. You whisper, "I did." The recording continues. It wasn't. There is a long pause. Then you hear him breathe. "I couldn't tell you everything because I was afraid the truth would make you afraid of your own life. I wanted you to grow without looking over your shoulder. I wanted you to trust people. I wanted you to love without wondering who might hurt you. The words break something open inside you. Because suddenly you understand. Your father wasn't trying to leave you with a mystery. He was trying to leave you with a future. The recording continues. There will come a day when you finally discover what I kept hidden. When that day comes, don't spend your life looking for someone to blame. Truth is not valuable because it gives you an enemy. Truth is valuable because it gives you freedom. You stare at the floor. That sentence changes everything. Because the person in the photograph may have made choices that caused pain. But your father does not want revenge. He wants release. He wants you to stop letting an old wound dictate who you become. The recording grows softer. There is one more thing you need to know. You lean closer. I knew I would not be here forever. Your breath catches. But I never wanted your memory of me to become a prison. You cover your mouth. The tears come freely now. Your father continues. Remember me when you laugh. Remember me when you succeed. Remember me when you sit at a table and realize you've built something beautiful. Don't only remember me on the days you hurt. The recording pauses. Then comes the sentence you never knew you needed. You don't honor me by staying broken. Everything inside you becomes quiet. You look around the room. The old table. The lamp. The photograph. The box. All the objects that once seemed like pieces of a painful past now feel different. They are not chains. They are evidence that love existed. Imperfectly. Humanly. Completely. You understand something you couldn't understand as a child. Parents do not always leave behind perfect words. Sometimes they leave unfinished conversations. Sometimes they make mistakes. Sometimes they protect us in ways we only understand much later. And sometimes the greatest inheritance they give us is not an explanation for everything that happened. It is the courage to keep living after it happened. You look at the photograph one final time. The person standing beside your father is still part of your life. You could call them. You could confront them. You could demand answers. But you realize something important. You don't need to become consumed by what they did. You need to decide what you will do with what you now know. So you place the photograph back into the box. Not because you are afraid of it. Because you no longer need it to define you. You close the lid. And for the first time, you say the words you couldn't say years ago. I forgive myself. The room doesn't shake. There is no supernatural sign. No voice from the heavens. Nothing dramatic happens outside the window. And somehow, that makes the moment more beautiful. Because healing does not always arrive like lightning. Sometimes it arrives as one quiet sentence spoken honestly in an empty room. You forgive yourself for being young. You forgive yourself for misunderstanding. You forgive yourself for the choices you made while trying to survive emotions you didn't know how to name. You forgive yourself for not knowing what your father knew. You forgive yourself for believing you had to carry his unfinished burdens. Then you whisper something else. I love you, Dad. And this time, the words don't feel like goodbye. They feel like gratitude. You imagine him hearing them not as a literal message from beyond, but as the echo of every loving memory he left inside you. The laugh. The advice. The ordinary mornings. The difficult conversations. The lessons you resisted. The lessons you finally understood. All of it remains. Not because death stopped time. Because love changed the way you remember it. Morning light begins spreading across the room. You open the curtains. The world outside looks almost exactly the same as it did yesterday. Cars move along the road. A neighbor opens a door. Someone is carrying groceries. A bird lands briefly on a wire. Nothing outside knows that something inside you has changed. But you know. You feel lighter. Not because every question has an answer. Not because the past suddenly became perfect. Because you finally understand that your life is allowed to continue. You don't have to wait for another sign. You don't have to punish yourself to prove that you cared. You don't have to keep reopening an old wound simply because it once belonged to someone you loved. You can carry the love forward without carrying the pain. And perhaps that is the real message hidden inside this fictional story. If you have lost someone you love, their absence may always have a shape. There may be mornings when you still instinctively want to tell them something. There may be songs that bring them back for a few seconds. There may be birthdays, holidays, empty chairs, old photographs, and ordinary moments that suddenly become sacred. Let those memories come. You don't have to run from them. But you also don't have to live inside them. Let your life become the continuation of the love they gave you. Let the dreams they once encouraged you to pursue become part of your tomorrow. Let yourself laugh without feeling guilty. Let yourself succeed without wondering whether you deserve it. Let yourself love again. Let yourself begin again. Because perhaps the deepest way to honor someone who loved you is not to remain where they last saw you. It is to become the person they always hoped you would have the freedom to become. You place the box safely away. Then you walk toward the door. Before leaving, you turn around once. The photograph is still there. For a moment, you smile. And in your imagination, you can almost hear your father's familiar voice saying the words you needed all along. Go live. So you do. Not because you have forgotten him. Because you haven't. You carry him differently now. Not as a question. Not as guilt. Not as an unfinished goodbye. But as part of the foundation beneath the person you are becoming. And if this story found a tender place in your heart because you have someone you miss, may you remember this. You are allowed to heal. You are allowed to remember. You are allowed to laugh again. You are allowed to build a beautiful life without feeling as though happiness means you have left someone behind. May the memories that once brought tears eventually bring warmth. May the lessons you received become wisdom instead of regret. May every good thing you build carry a little of the love you were given. And when the quiet moments come, may you feel surrounded not by fear, but by gratitude for having loved someone deeply enough that their presence still matters. May your heart find peace where it once carried questions. May your future become larger than your past. May you have the courage to release what was never yours to carry. And may every new beginning remind you that life is still writing beautiful chapters for you. If this fictional story touched something inside you, take a quiet moment and write, "I choose peace," in the comments, not as a supernatural promise, but as a personal declaration that you are ready to move forward with love. And if you know someone who is carrying grief, regret, or an old memory they have never been able to put down, share this with them. Sometimes a simple story arrives at the right moment and reminds someone that they are still allowed to hope. Take care of your heart. Keep going. And wherever your journey leads next, may you walk into it with peace, courage, and the quiet certainty that your story is not over.